Kiki, it just always baffles me. Half the time when I click to do an intro, I have no idea what intro is popping up. So I want to say welcome to everybody that's in the chat. It's great to see you. Kiki and I have been off for a little bit, and we apologize about that. But we're back, and here we are. Miss Swamp Rose, how are you?
I'm doing so good. Thanks for having me back. Well, thanks for, first off, organizing this live stream for us tonight. And it's so good to be back. It's so good to see everyone. And we were just on panel on another show right on the other side of YouTube there, Tommy Jude. It was really fun. And I think that we came off that with some really great topics to add to the conversation tonight too.
Well, I think it's always amazing. That shows you how well organized I am. I had just no idea what I was doing. I knew we were scheduled for the 6:30 slot, but I slid over to just say hello to the chat. Next thing you know, we were both on panel with Mr. Tommy Jude and his moderators, and that was definitely interesting.
It was really good. Good to see everyone. So, so AR, I feel like we have a few good live streams with you in the next few days before you're going to be taking a small break from YouTube. I don't know, what's your plans in the next few weeks? I was hoping you could update my audience. We could hear a little bit about that.
It's always interesting because, the minute I make plans, I go meet with the doctors and the surgeons and things just kind of trickle down. So Monday, May 5th, we're just right around the corner from it as we're on Friday now. So I'm going to make it through the weekend. Monday, I have my big eye surgery on the right eye to get us started with the cataracts. And then, so that's going to start the process, and then it's going to be all downhill from there, from what I understand, because on the 12th, I'm scheduled again to go to the left eye. And then not long after that, it's back to the right eye for the retinal detachment. So it's going to be a back and forth when it comes to the eyes. But we did also find out a little bit of news, my wife and I, because of, you probably remember, I shared it with you, Kiki, my little stumble and fall down not too long ago. I saw a foot specialist just the other day, and I do have a break in the left foot with a partial Achilles tendon tear. So now we're looking at that to see what we're going to do there. So there's a lot in the game plan, but I'm going to fight through it from the month of May. I'm going to battle through it. And when the retinal detachment surgery happens in the right eye, which we're suspecting won't be until most likely the end of May, early June, I'm going to battle through it. I'm going to be working. So I do have a live set up for everybody that's interested on Sunday. We're going to be live with Unfiltered Lucky, and we're going to be discussing the Idaho 4 case. Thursday, I'm going to be rolling into a live with Murder Metal Mayhem and Pete. So look for that one as well. And then obviously Kiki and I will be working as usual, hard behind the scenes to keep everything up to date and rolling forward. So does that sound like a roller coaster to you, Kiki?
It absolutely does. I hope whatever's going on with your leg, you can, get through without more surgery and maybe some therapy or something. I didn't know that was the final conclusion of your fall the other day, but just one more thing, keep you in our prayers for, and sorry about that.
I think, I'm not complaining at all. I'm staying pretty positive. It's a good thing when you fall that, it probably would have been better if I'd hit my head a little harder or run my bell a little bit more because, there's not a lot of brain loss happening up inside my ears, but it's always something when you hear a tear of an Achilles tendon. That's a little bit nerve-wracking because, at the end of the day with stuff like that happening, it could lead to the ACL, which I've torn twice before, and I'm kind of nervous to have to go through a rehab of another ACL. So I'm being very careful with that. I'm being as lazy as possible, and the wife's staying on top of me. So that's always a good thing. When she's the boss and making sure I'm not doing anything dumb, that's always a good thing. So
I know you're in good hands. So.
I am, and it's been a nice little break, as many probably have realized. I've taken a little bit of a break. I haven't been as active when it comes to the true crime or the channel. We definitely have stepped away from lives here, but I haven't even been doing much content. So it's been nice to refresh a little bit, get the mindset a little bit stronger. But we do have some very important conversations that I think that we're going to jump into to start the show. And then for everybody to know, Kiki always comes organized with talking points. So we're going to move into that as well. So definitely stay engaged within the chat, as we are always engaged watching everything you guys have to say. And we'll definitely be answering questions and relaying messages with you guys as well. Absolutely. Anything you want to say to get us before we get rolling, Kiki? You got anything on the mind? Anything important?
Nothing that's not case related. I'm ready to go with my talking points when you are. I don't know if you want me to roll things off, but I know you also had some really interesting things we were talking about backstage in mind that you might want to start with. But whatever you want me to do.
I do. I want to get rolling a little bit with kind of obviously the Bryan Kohberger's defense team angle when it comes to the multi-perp defense, because we have a very big hearing coming up and a deadline really set by the judge of May 15th for them to be able to display their evidence. And I do want to discuss that a little bit back and forth with you, because that's a big day. That's a big difference maker when it comes to this case. But also leading into that, I want to speak just very briefly, because I think it's important that we have such a good community of open minds and also respect factor that, I don't think we have to direct it at the people within our chats and our channels. But this case has literally created the most division between people I've ever seen when it comes to any true crime case, and also the hate that's just relaying off of that to the attacks, not only of people within the community that have an open mind and want to discuss things, but also the attacks that are happening on content creators that have their thoughts, their opinions, their perspectives, and of course they present their narratives. And the attacks are getting harsher and harsher, like you said, Kiki, because the trial's just right around the corner here, and it's sad to see how harsh people are becoming at this point, all based off of a case, a trial, a defendant. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that a little bit too, Kiki, before I dive in and throw my meanness around.
Yeah, I think that I'll go right up to the top of this food chain. I don't know. I'm just a little fish in a big sea, but here's the thing is, like, I can see it. I don't want to name names, but we probably should. Well, I don't know. We look at the mainstream reporters in this, and we know they are sensationalizing things, and we know that they are creating an atmosphere where they know that people who are trying to stay in the middle, trying to stay objective, trying to take that path of the traditional pathway of a journalist, they're riling things up. It trickles down right from the very top of the media sources. And there are times where you can look at some of these reporters like Ashley Banfield, and you're like, what you're doing. Like, how to do this right. Or even Brian Enton, you know what I mean? People that they know how to do this job right, and you see them swaying back and forth. Although Brian Enton, I thought, was doing a pretty good job talking about alternative suspects a few times recently. But you get what I'm saying. I think that the animosity and the hatred and everything, it truly is an atmosphere that's created generationally. We can see the generation before us and the Nancy Graces and the Howard Blooms, and I'm not going to say the other, people. You can see it, right? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, And I agree with you, heart and soul. I mean, a lot of this issue is starting in the bigger spectrums with the newscasters that by far have a bigger following, more people standing behind them. But the bad thing about that is it's trickling down into the smaller crevices of even just the content creators, and then into the community of true crime itself. And it's sad because literally, like, our topic tonight that we're diving into to get started is a multi-perp angle, because this has been one of the biggest discussions when it comes to the Bryan Kohberger arrest and the Idaho 4 case. Is if people don't feel 100% confident that Bryan Kohberger is the person that committed this crime, it opens up the angle to an alternative perp discussion. And it's crazy the divide that comes from that. Instead of open-mindedness and the very concept of innocent until proven guilty, and that's what we discuss, innocent until proven guilty. Whether you agree that Bryan Kohberger's the perp or not the perp, you still have to be open-minded to discussion without turning the hatred towards somebody else that sees it in a different way.
Yeah, I think that this is where I think our experience, our time that we've spent on this case, the trial and error that we've had through live streams and videos, we just have to keep our eyes on those documents and our ears on these hearings. What's official statements? What's going on? And just really cut out the noise. Dare I go out and say, sometimes I think people are having interviews in the media, possibly to draw attention away from document dumps, just like we see in our government. You know what I mean? When something serious is happening and they might send somebody out on a media blitz, so everyone pays attention to one person and doesn't look at maybe something that's confusing or not right or incomplete in the documentation that we're seeing. I just want to I've seen that time and time again, and I don't think that this last week or so has been any different.
I agree with you. And one of the biggest things that I want to put out there is I'm not a person that has found Bryan Kohberger guilty of this crime, and I'm not a person that has found Bryan Kohberger innocent of this crime. So when I get into discussions of potential alternative perps, I'm very open-minded to that discussion, because I don't know all of the evidence that's literally behind the scenes against Bryan Kohberger. I can only get my feelings and get my opinions based off of what's been shown to us at this point. And I'm up in arms. I just look at it. I don't think it's the strongest of evidence from what we've seen at this point. And I also feel like there's been a lot of dishonesty behind that. And that dishonesty has started in the very spectrum that you're talking about, Kiki, in regards to the journalists that are bringing information and discussion about this case. And I now, I watched a little bit of the work that you did with Dr. Remsland, and now I'm frustrated, even though I've never spoken to the woman before. I don't know much of the story. I don't know everything about it, but I'm watching other people now attacking her because they're claiming that she's awaiting a book deal or something with Bryan Kohberger, and they kept in touch. And this is the connection to why Bryan Kohberger potentially committed this crime. And this is where I really want people to understand that the brakes have to be pumped on these types of things, because that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous, because now you're actually accusing an individual that has nothing to do with the Idaho 4 case, outside of she worked with Bryan Kohberger, in his educational pathway. And now, the fingers are being pointed that direction. And that's sickening. That's sickening.
Wow. You're going to toss it to me like that. Well, okay. So the first thing I'm going to say is the first thing I'm going to say is I made a statement regarding Dr. Ramsland the other day in a live stream, and I want to say it wasn't my best video and it wasn't my best live stream. I certainly could have worded it differently. I could have thought about how I delivered that message differently, and I actually, so with that said, I will say, I don't feel like I delivered the message properly for Dr. Ramsland, but essentially I was talking the other day about sensationalizing some of her work. And the first thing I want to point out about Dr. Ramsland is that her work is absolutely phenomenal, and it is world renowned, and it is particularly world renowned in the circles of law enforcement. Dr. Ramsland has done work that created profiles that allow us to, I'll give you an example. In the most recent interview we saw with Steve Gonzalez on Daniel's show, he was talking about how he went to Coeur d'Alene to meet with the FBI agents. And they said, okay, so when this happens, it could be a symptom of this or something like that. They get that information from people like Dr. Ramsland and her profiling and the work that she does with these people. And she deserves a lot of respect. And I think that part of the reason why a lot of people are talking about Dr. Ramsland goes back to what I'm talking about with media. It trickles down from the very top, the top people in the media, and it appears to be definitely something generational. Now, Howard Bloom wrote an article that's actually behind a paywall right now. And this article essentially implied that there's hidden information about Bryan Kohberger and his interactions with Dr. Ramsland before and after the crime. I mean, I just don't understand how you speculate on something like that with someone who's so well respected within the law enforcement community. You know, there's nothing mysterious, I would think, about those emails. But then again, I don't know anything either. I don't know. I think that I haven't necessarily seen anyone disrespect Dr. Ramsland, but that one article with Howard Bloom, it bothered me the way that it was worded. I don't know how you felt about that. I don't know. Please take the floor, because I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts after what I just.
I'm not sure I can say a heck of a lot positive on how I feel about Bloom. I feel as though when it comes to this case, he's kind of overstepped his boundaries a little bit in regards to wanting to rush a book deal and things of that nature. And I get it. I mean, it seems like it's coming from all angles when it comes down to releasing information that they feel is pertinent to this case and things of that nature. But, and I feel sickened by the fact that I feel as though this has become fairy tale fantasy writing moment, when he could have potentially handled this so much better. And now for him to literally not only bring in Ramsland, but then he's bringing in people like Bryan Kohberger's family into his narratives and things of that nature, is just not a good look. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, even to wrap it back around towards, my original thoughts of the multi-perp discussion, he himself seems to have that thought process and is just afraid to put that out there, because I think he's on the train that he wants to actually, find Bryan Kohberger as a guilty person before venturing out to who else could potentially be involved in this case. And I think that that's being hand-walked by law enforcement. And then it's being hand-walked by the Idaho, attorneys that are prosecuting the case, and the judge. And I think they're trying to literally get through the original, arrest, and then see where that goes into whether they'll open the door to multi-perps. And that shouldn't be the way that this was investigated. I think it was poorly investigated to begin with. And I think that, Howard Bloom is just feeding that narrative, and he's not the only one. I mean, why does this man, and this is kind of a question I have for you, Kiki. I mean, he's an established journalist. He's well paid. He's got good book deals. I mean, I don't think he's legitimately desperate for more attention. So why is he literally going on small YouTube channel platforms to continue to push what he feels or what he has to say? Why doesn't he just write it?
I think that's a great question. I'm actually glad you tossed it to me because I put a lot of thought into this. I want to say a couple things, about Howard Bloom. The one thing I will say is when it comes to the alternative suspect theory, it's the one thing I have seen him entertained in some of the interviews, particularly when it comes to talking about the fraternities and things like that. So I will give him credit in that. And as far as him going on smaller YouTube channels, I actually, and it's another thing I can actually say sort of positive about Howard Bloom. I feel that he sees the effect and the way that social media carries a narrative and can affect, in certain instances, popular opinion. And he's just, he's evolving with the times. And I think he is trying to interject himself in the best way he can. And I mean, I think he picked some channels. They are smaller, but they're larger on the, I don't know.
Yeah, but he's only sticking with one narrative, and that's guilt.
Not giving him a pass.
I personally believe that somebody in a position like that needs to be open-minded and discuss the case in an open-minded way, not just to pile more bricks on top of guilt. I mean, I get it. If you feel like the perpetrator, the suspect, the defendant is guilty, that's great. But you have to be very careful of what position you're bringing that very verbiage to people out there. Because, I mean, I hate to say this, but when it comes to the Idaho 4 case, and Bryan Kohberger's a defendant, the larger masses of people watching are watching the people that have found Bryan Kohberger guilty already. The channels that are fighting for innocent until proven guilty don't get the followings or the views that someone like a Nancy Grace, an Ashley Banfield, even a Coffindoffer or a Howard Bloom get. And, at that point, it's like, it's an uphill battle for somebody that literally has not been convicted yet. He's being assassinated. I'm talking about Bryan Kohberger from all angles, not only in the courtroom, but now out here. And I have a problem with someone like Howard Bloom that has more power within his words, just adding more to the rock pile.
I was literally pointing out the two positive things I can find about. I have disagreed with this particular style of writing, and I think that I don't think I ever would have. I don't think I ever would have looked at it through the lens that I am now, unless it were for having this true crime podcast. Because now I see from the point of view of somebody who's trying to form a defense, and how it's nearly an impossible thing to do with some of these factors. Like, number one thing that sticks in my mind is the use of IgG, investigative genetic genealogy, when it comes to the probable cause or the case you're building against a defendant. And the reason I say that is because the way that our system works, in order to get the discovery involved with the IgG, if it's going to be used for probable cause in this country, and I'm not necessarily talking about Bryan Kohberger, I'm just speaking in general, with the IgG, the discovery process doesn't come until you have to go through that process at trial. Meanwhile, people all across this country have to plead their cases on IgG that their lawyers can't review, because that's the way that our system works. And it sings these uphill battles, this heavy hand of the state and how it comes down on people. That's what I didn't see before. And now I do see how, when it comes to speculating about things about the person who is being tried ahead of time in the media, that is so unfair. It's different than speculating against could there be an alternative theory even, or an alternative suspect? This is literally affecting the cross-section of peers in which the jury is going to be chosen for this person. We have to bring to the attention of people in this country the notion of innocent until proven guilty, because it is a responsibility of you as a citizen to make that choice, to talk like that, to view through that lens. But yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry.
No, you did. And you and I were both over, like we said, at Tommy Jew's once upon a crime time before we came live here. And I think you and I both stepped away with a little bit of a gut feeling of literally how down people are getting over not only what we're watching within the process, but the newest documents and the conversations. It's becoming a damper for many that have put heart and soul into this case and really truly believe that Bryan Kohberger is innocent. And, I personally, when I came into discussing the Idaho 4, I wanted to myself focus on the system itself, the judicial system. I didn't want to be the person that weighed out whether somebody was innocent or guilty. But as you do your research and you go through the documents and you go through the conversations, you tend to venture into a certain direction of your feelings. And, at the end of the day, I've been very careful. And that's one thing that has helped me be able to take a step back here recently and just refresh kind of the thought process and the way I'm at. And that's why this conversation, when it comes to multi-perp, is so critical, is because people need to fully understand what this is coming about when the May 15th hearing comes before Hitler, because there's two different ways that this has to go when it comes to multi-perp. You're discussing Bryan Kohberger could potentially be innocent of a crime. That's a very simplistic way of an alternative perp defense when you get to trial. You can discuss that. What the defense is trying to do is enter evidence and be able to construct an actual investigation pointing at certain people, even using at trial those people's names and building their defense that those people committed the crime. And that's different than building a defense that Bryan Kohberger did not commit the crime. And I think that's where a lot of people are missing the boat in their discussions of, you have to allow a multi-perp defense in. Well, no, you only have to allow the defense's capability to say Bryan Kohberger didn't commit the crime, and here's some facts to why we think that. Meaning they could discuss the blood found at the crime scene. They can discuss other evidence that they feel, but they can't put together a narrative or paint a picture of who could potentially be the one that did that. And that's where the struggle for the defense is going to come into play. And that's where I think this battle with Hitler is going to be proving a mountain climb that the defense might just, they just might not be able to make it up that mountain. And you're on. There you go.
Sorry about that. Oh my gosh. I mean, you're tossing it to me with such with one of the most passionate things we could be talking about right now, because this is what is going to be happening in this hearing coming up. I'm trying draw a blank right as you're I know I look down at my notes and then I'm like, I can't even remember what point. Toss it to me with what was the last thing you said? I'm sorry, I got distracted by the chat.
In regards, in your opinion, do you think Hitler, the judge that we've already seen that has been so strict on the defense so far in every motion filed, do you think Hitler is going to open the door for the defense to literally paint the picture of certain individuals, meaning almost naming names that they are the actual perps of the crime? Or do you think he's going to cut it off as, you can try to prove Bryan's innocent, but I don't want you going down any road that leads to somebody else?
Well, me personally, I just don't even know how that can be allowed. So I just don't know how you cannot allow somebody to explore alternative suspect theory. I mean, I guess that we can only speculate right now exactly what's going to be said at that hearing. Now, if the alternative suspect with what maybe expert witness Cy Ray is bringing to the table, that's one thing. What if it has something to do with one of the DNA experts has to say about one of those alternative, samples of DNA found at the crime scene? We don't know. I think one of the things that a lot of people, this case has been weighing heavy on a lot of people recently. And I think the one thing I want to remind people is, when we look at the case, oftentimes we're looking at everything in its totality, all the things that we've heard, all of the, we'll have a video where we bring up 10 different talking points of different crazy elements to this case. But the fact is that other than in the opening and closing statements, there just isn't a time we're going to be looking at this entire case. And it's my understanding in its totality. It's going to be individually with each piece of evidence. And so I do think that when it comes to the alternative suspect, like, I do think, I hope, I would imagine that under all circumstances, they should be able to bring up if there is something suspect. But I also think that the case will be won or lost, fighting each of these elements in itself. And I also wonder, is that voir dire conversation that Ann Taylor wanted to ask a question to Nick Balance, voir dire, I wonder if it's going to be done at this hearing. And I wonder if it's going to have something to do with the fact that those 7 minutes of exculpatory evidence that they referenced in the vague and undisclosed expert witness that the defense filed before the April 9th hearing, excuse me, my understanding is that at that point, after the tower stops tracking Bryan's car, that's the car is then picked up on the authenticated cameras. So I'm just wondering if alternative suspect, they're going to be talking to Nick Balance about, did he track Bryan in those last 7 minutes? Is it really this same car that they have on these videos? What happened to track? So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do believe the judge will allow alternative suspect theories. I'd be shocked if he didn't. But I guess it's also, the first case I've ever followed this closely, so I have nothing to compare it to.
Well, again, and to kind of reiterate, so Judge Hippler cannot stop the defense from saying, we found 2 other blood samples within the home. Judge Hippler cannot stop the defense from saying, we don't believe that Bryan Kohberger's car is, as our experts have deemed it, to be a white Hyundai Sonata, not, so they're going to be able to battle all of that. Where the difference is going to be, and here's, a great question. Do we feel as though the defense has had time to actually test the other blood found at the crime scene and then compare that to other people? Well, let me explain to you why that's so difficult. First of all, the defense team was not the original collector of that blood. They were not the original collectors of the actual DNA that would be up for testing. So now we have to question on how that DNA, blood samples, whatever it might be, was handled from the get-go, because it sure sounds as if law enforcement did not test it. So now when it gets turned over to the defense, if it actually got turned over, the defense now could put their teams together to test that DNA. Let's say that DNA now comes back and it's not in CODIS. So we're almost at the original point, just like where, the prosecution was when they got the original DNA from the knife sheet back and it wasn't in CODIS. So now you got to go the extreme extra route to try to figure out whose DNA that is.
Right.
So even if you go do IgG and you go do all these things, you know where your biggest roadblock is going to be? You have nothing to compare it to. You have no individual that by law would have to provide you with a DNA sample to compare that to. That's where this biggest issue I have with the IgG, getting back to Bryan Kohberger, is they were able to get the buccal swab to compare to the DNA on the knife sheath, and now you have a match. Nobody in their right mind will ever provide a DNA sample that the defense would be able to compare to any DNA, blood, or anything found at that crime scene. So now Judge Hippler is going to say, what evidence do you have that connects? Let's just, I'm not going to use names because I'm not a believer in names, but let's say, what evidence do you have that a frat member is connected to this crime scene? And the defense would have to come up and say, well, we have DNA matches. We have pictures of them walking in and out of the home. We have their car on video around the crime scene. They would have to have evidence that directly connects that person to the crime scene. And at that point, they would have to literally get a judge to sign a warrant for that person's investigation or their arrest. Just like the PCA got Bryan Kohberger, they would have to go through the very same steps to prove an alternative perp committed this crime. And I don't see Judge Hippler even coming remotely close to opening that door.
Gosh, when you put it like that, AR, I mean, I don't know. It has been, when this case does go underway, it will have been over 2.5 years. And I would imagine that they've been able to at least get investigative genetic genealogy on it. It's unfathomable to think that nobody's done that. It'd be crazy, but who knows?
Are you talking about on the blood found at the crime scene?
Correct. Right. To see if there's some sort of alternative suspect.
Absolutely not. They haven't taken that blood to the next level. Absolutely no way. For what purpose? What would that blood? So far, all we've heard is the prosecution and law enforcement state that blood has no connection to the crime scene, which means no judge would sign off on any investigation into that blood, meaning there's no test to be ran. You have no guidance to be able to test it. The defense does not have the power that law enforcement does. Law enforcement has the judge's backing when they need something. They apply for a warrant or they apply for the judge to grant them permission to move forward to do something. The defense doesn't have that luxury. The defense would literally have to bring it to Judge Hippler and say, Your Honor, we really need this to happen and X, Y, and Z need to be tested. And he would have to, again, find probable cause to sign for that to happen, to give his ultimate decision that needs to happen. And that has not happened in this case. Judge definitely didn't do it. And we know Hippler has not done it.
Well, okay. So I'm a little confused then because what I remember when they initially brought up the unknown DNA, Jennings said, all right, you can have it. And that's when the defense got the unknown DNA. And that was in 2023. And I thought they said they could test it. And that's why it's so crazy to me to think that it would be, it doesn't necessarily mean they got a match, but.
So they can run it through CODIS. You're always allowed to run it through the CODIS. And then you could most likely compare it. I mean, I get what you're saying, to go through the IgG process. They could potentially go through one that doesn't have a block against you know, what the law enforcement backdoor entries, and they can go through all the process of that. But if they had done that, we would have already seen all of that entered into the court docs and onto the docket for the court. We would see those results, because if they had done that based upon evidence turned over by the prosecution to the defense as discoverable evidence, they would have to, in return, put into the court records every result they got.
And that's a good point, because the alternative suspect that they have, it sounds like it's someone that they basically found out about recently, like this year. So if it was via unknown DNA, it wouldn't have been. So I'm wondering, is their alternative suspect, does it have something to do with anything that was turned over since the January hearings, where all of, I don't know.
I think it's from the way that Ann Taylor made it sound, because like I keep banging on the table. I was in the courtroom and I was listening as much as I possibly could. The way she made it sound, it was between the January hearings and the April 9th hearings that this tip was relayed to them, and they jumped on it immediately to begin the investigation. And it was very, very early in the investigation. And their main thing that she stated to the court that they were looking into was actual video from the campus of the University of Idaho, trying to connect cameras together. They were trying to connect cameras and footage together to work further into their investigation. And it came based on a tip. It came from a tip. So like what the FBI did when they called in the tip with Bryan Kohberger's name to law enforcement, somebody called in some sort of tip to the defense, and they began, working back from that tip into an investigation. But, the sad thing about that, Swamp, is that legitimately today could be completely different from what Ann Taylor said on the 9th. That could have just turned out to be a dud, a dead end. Could mean nothing. The defense might already have moved off of that and said, well, it didn't lead to anything. We thought it may, but it didn't lead to anything. So that might be gone.
That's true. It's true. I guess hopefully we're going to find out, since we don't quite know if this hearing is going to be open or closed, I guess, right
now. It's going to be very, very interesting. I think this is the type of trial, type hearing. They're going to have to close this, because the defense is literally bringing other people and evidence and names into play that have not been charged. They don't have warrants. They don't have anything for them, unless somehow before this hearing warrants are issued, PCAs are written, and these people are legitimately going to be arrested, and then the judge can make that decision to put that information out there. But could you imagine you or I are being investigated, and then all of a sudden at a hearing for an arrested defendant, a suspect that's been charged with quadruple homicide, our names are now being spoken in front of the entire public, that they're literally trying to pin the crime on us without even any warrant, without us even being in custody.
You know what? You've got a really good point. I just didn't even think of it like that, but absolutely, this makes a really good reason why I don't know how much of this we're actually going to see. It's almost like it's a hearing. It's why we don't hear about grand jury hearings, deciding whether to indict someone. It's that very reason. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, and that's another thing to roll into in regards to that grand jury. The little slippings of information that come, that's against the law, right? Like, grand jury information does not come out. Look at how even the judge, took everything, and he had to look at it in his own chambers and do all, and yet there's people out here that have claimed to have leaked grand jury informations that they were unsure of this, or this is what caught their ear. That's all BS. That's all BS. That's all made up, narrative to keep the hype going that this kid is guilty or whatever it might be. I've been through grand jury indictments. Every time I've been indicted, it was by a grand jury because it's the quickest, easiest way to do it. Like Arizona relies on grand jury indictments. They don't really do it any other way. They do grand jury indictments. And for that information to slip out, especially if it's a victim's family member that's giving that information out, it's bogus information. That's fake info. That's not real.
Well, toss it to me. Like I actually want to take it a teeny bit further and say, if we're going to talk about grand juries, grabbing my jacket here. If we're going to talk about grand juries, it wasn't just one grand jury. I mean, we actually heard three grand juries got leaked. So we had the this looks so stupid. I'll put it on with the camera up. We had the grand jury that was mainstream written about, the one that allegedly information, well, we know information got leaked with the grand jury that convened to put charges on Bryan Kohberger. There was a grand jury in Pennsylvania that convened for his parents. That was supposed to be completely sealed. That shouldn't have been open to the public. Nobody should know about that. And then the third one would be the grand jury, the federal grand jury that we heard. Well, I guess we heard then, like, one of those subpoenas was inadvertently given to Bryan Kohberger. So right there, we've seen three mistakes in the grand jury to the federal grand jury system in this case alone. And that's really scary because, I mean, I know the system is only as good as the people running it, but it's like super scary because this is that safety measure for, I don't know. It's a safety measure in our judicial system. But
yeah, I mean, I agree. And the one thing, and I'm going to do some work on it. I'm sure we'll converse more about it here in the near future. I want people to fully understand the feds are not completely out of this game as of yet. I know a lot of people have said, well, the grand jury didn't indict him at the feds. They didn't this, they didn't that. The feds on a case like this have no timetable that they have to do this. And at the back of my head, I listened, and here I go. I'm venturing off the path again. I ventured over and I watched the Steve G and Daniel conversation. And one of the things that Steve G brought up was that the feds could legitimately hold back charging Kohberger with Kaylee's crime. In case the state crime goes bad, they could just charge him in the feds. But the whole reason why they didn't do that was because, the death penalty, blah, blah, blah. That's all BS nonsense too. Look at Luigi Mangione. The feds can file a death penalty case just as easy as a state prosecution can, especially since Idaho's a death penalty state. The feds can very easily take that in. And the federal path to indicting and convicting people is so much easier than the state. They don't need to just hold back one victim and say, okay, we're only going to prosecute him for Kaylee. If this has a feds tie to it, he's getting charged all the way across the board, plus more, because there's going to be a bigger charge than just the homicides. I don't know. It's just, and somebody says we're slaying this topic tonight, and it's because this is such a broad topic, but it has so much meaning to this case. Because if you really think about it, Swamp, since this case broke on November 13th of 2022, and this hit the waves of everybody's eyes, and then it grew and it grew. The number one thing that's discussed about this case is who else could have potentially committed this crime. That's been the biggest discussion out there. Who else could be either the one, or who else could be involved, or did Bryan Kohberger have help? It's all about alternative multi-perp. No matter whether you think Bryan's guilty or not, you have to be open-minded to the fact this could be a very easy multi-perp crime. Makes a lot of sense. That's why this topic just will be forever, never-ending topic. Even if Bryan Kohberger gets found guilty of this crime, this conversation will never end. It's just like Chris Watts and his little girlfriend on the side, Nicole. The conversation's never going to end of whether she was involved or not.
Unless some of these questions get answered at trial, I completely agree with you. I think that if I have to answer to you, I gave an answer on Tommy's panel earlier. I just want to repeat. I wrote it down. He had asked us, if we were to look at an alternative suspect, who would it be? And I'm just going to tell you my answer because it kind of plays into how I'm going to answer you. First off, I don't have a person. There are three things that I would turn to if I were defending Bryan Kohberger. And these are things that I think will linger if they don't get answered in court, is the point that I'm getting at to you. And the first one is going to be the identity of that blood on the knife sheath, the murder weapon. How that's so inexplicable to me, and how that can't be answered. If that's not answered in court, I cannot see that mystery going away. I can't even see how it doesn't somehow play into reasonable doubt with a jury. But like you said, they've, no results likely. That's the first thing. The second one is going to be for me, the fact that there was the request from the investigators about finding multiple perps in a white Elantra, right? So it wasn't like one suspect. They were looking for multiple perps. So I would say like that's the next one. And then the third thing I would bring up is this was a targeted attack. Like from the beginning, the police were telling us this was a targeted attack. So something about it at the crime scene told them that it was the house or the people, so much so that they lifted that shelter in place order within hours. So next, somebody's going to have to explain to a jury exactly, what that means. Like who's targeted? Why does that mean Bryan Kohberger? Why does that's got to point to something or someone? I don't know. But without the answers to these questions, I just don't see the case, like you said, the mystery, that the case that goes on and on, the conversation that never ends. So
I take a little different perspective when I start thinking about the multi-perp, not only defense, but also the prosecution. So in a prosecution's role, they're not doing the wrong thing. If they truly feel as though Bryan Kohberger is guilty within this crime, as being even just a minimum of part of the crime, you go after who you have in custody now. And two things could legitimately come of that is Bryan Kohberger breaks and actually gives up information to your next arrest, or at some point you could put the pieces together utilizing the investigative tools that you have to add to the amount of people in that have been arrested. So at the end of the day, a prosecution's route within this investigation is you have to find who's connected to Bryan. You're not so much looking to see, how do we determine this blood evidence? How do we do this? How do we do that? You start with Bryan and work your way out to find connections, people that directly are linked to Kohberger. And one of those places, I guarantee you that they would start within something like that, is the so-called survey and the people that were connected to Bryan via that survey, which it's a funny story. When Bryan Kohberger was arrested, one of my initial thoughts and one of my theories and the things that I followed was someone actually guided and was teaching Kohberger through their actions, allowing the book studious Kohberger to learn from watching and the feel of it without actually committing it. So could he have legitimately linked up with somebody that was capable of these crimes and he just kind of played the part? And then, as I learned things like clean up of the crime scene, I'm here to help, things of that nature, I'm putting two to two together. Like Bryan came in to literally help this perp get away with the crime. He's the driver, he's the cleaner, he's the helper. But I don't know if they're ever going to make that type of connection. The defense on the alternative side needs to break away from a connection of Bryan Kohberger and try to piece together the connection to the actual victims. And that's why I understand why so many people, they've really worked this case as content creators and people involved to build those connections of why others would target not only the house, but the individuals in the home. And then they build a strong connection of why that would lead to such a devastating crime. So even though I get so frustrated and I get so upset at times listening to different theories that people put out there and the accusations they make, I, at the end of the day, have to understand it, because what they've done is they've separated Bryan Kohberger away from the crime because they haven't found that connection. And now they're utilizing certain people that have connections to the home or the victims, and they built their thought processes and their theories based upon that. So, I mean, it makes sense, because that's what a defense attorney is going to have to do as well. When Ann Taylor and Massoff step up to the plate to prove multi-perp or alternate perp theories, and I'm not saying pointing the finger, but they've first got to open the door that it could potentially be multi-perps and alternative perps. They've got to build a connection, that separates Bryan from that. That's a difficult mountain with this type of judge. Hippler he's tough. And he gives no leeway to the defense. And I think that's why some people are getting kind of emotionally chaotic in what they're seeing happen. And some people are even taking it, Swamp, we talked about, we were on Tommy's panel, and we see a little bit of a hesitation now to where people are not quite as confident of what's happening before them, especially through what they're reading in the docs on pure innocence. And I think that's Hippler's, they're changing the course of what's happening in this case. You're on mute, Kiki.
Okay. Sorry about that. Mm-hmm. And it does feel like Ann's conducting an investigation, too. And I don't know. I just, there's just so many things. There's so many things to know. I'm turning to my notes right now to see, another thing that when you bring up Judge Hippler is some of these issues you wonder, we talked about this case is going to go to appeal and stuff like that. Sometimes you wonder why he didn't make certain choices to prevent further litigation down the road. Especially when it comes to Cyre's affidavit, that really comes to mind for me. And there's been a lot of speculation lately in different circles about who might be leaving the defense team. I don't personally think it's Cyre. I think he's got a huge testimony to give this court. He doesn't just have the scope of his testimony talking regarding where Bryan Kohberger was at the time of the crime. He's also got a lot to say about the investigative techniques. And I just, I don't know where Ann is going to bring in the alternative suspect theory, but could it be could it have something to do with Cy? Because somebody has got to take the jury and bring them, captivate them and bring them on they're going to have to captivate the jury and explain why Bryan's innocent. And is it going to be Cyree? Or in the same note, we talked a lot about Massoff last time we were on panel. And a few of the things that you brought up was Massoff is Bryan Kohberger's body language instantly changes when he interacts with her. From not just his body language, but the way that he talks, the way that, you can see his personality kind of light up when he talks to her. And that's interesting that he has that reaction to her. Does she have that reaction on everybody? Is this the person that's going to captivate the jury's attention, when it comes time for the trial? She has such awesome body language. So she not only has a great speaking voice and presence, but she also has she just has really good muscle control. She always has a face that is welcoming. That's part of body language too. And she has experience as a Supreme Court attorney. So she knows the federal law. I just think this woman is going to be key in Bryan Kohberger's defense. I don't know. I hope I'm answering your question well enough, but you can guide me if you want me to go a different direction with it.
I mean, to kind of give you a perspective on what you're saying when it comes to Massoff, I'm not one, and my wife hates this about me, that if you don't interest me, I don't give you the time of day. I'll act like I'm paying attention, but I'm not paying attention. And, when I was in that courtroom in Idaho, it was very easy for me to just shut off kind of the overall attention span. I could care less what Ashley Jennings had to say. She didn't captivate me at all. She didn't catch my attention. Jeff Nye had a few good things to say, but he didn't catch my attention. Bill Thompson's scratchy, shaky voice was the other reason why I paid him any attention. Ann Taylor, I heard a few things she had to say, but I really lost his I don't know. I just lost feeling and respect for the things she was trying to accomplish. And of course, Hippler, you're always going to pay attention to him. He's the judge. Massoff, I was just directly intrigued by. And for me, that it's rare. I'm not a personable, want to sit there and listen and talk to people. And I'll tell you what, she had me intrigued, and that I wanted to watch, even like you said, her body movements and what the engagement she had, not only with Bryan, but Becca Barlow, who was sitting there, and then how she would turn and talk to Ann and people would, chuckle. And she just never seemed defeated at any point in the hearing, that they were not getting what they wanted to get accomplished. She didn't seem defeated at all by it. And I'll tell you, I walked away from that saying, that's who I would have as my lead attorney in this case. And that's the one, Massoff is the one that the jury's going to pay attention to. And I think she's going to trip up the prosecution. I'm not talking about the actual, the witnesses or the experts. Massoff is going to trip up the prosecution itself. And it's going to be interesting to watch. Very, very interesting.
I just want to build up a couple of things that you just said. Number one, with Ann Taylor, she definitely comes in second to me with Massoff. But, in these hearings, I feel like, and I'd love to know what the chat thinks. I'd love to know your thoughts on this as well, and yours too, AR, that I feel like she kind of, in a way, holds back. Like, she just doesn't want to show her cards right now. She knows that half of this is just not going to get addressed by the judge in these pretrial hearings. She's going to have to play her cards in front of a jury of Bryan's peers. And I do feel like she sometimes holds back a little bit, whether that's the right move or not the right move. I can see it now. And when it comes to Massoff, she's masterful, you know, just like a real lady should know how to do. When Judge Hippler comes at her with a critique, she's able to put out that energy that calms him. You know, she just knows how to do that. And it has to do with vocal tone. It also has to, number one, body language, vocal tone, but most importantly, she has the presence of mind to be self-aware and know right what to say. She's done her homework. She's prepared. She's just, like you said, she's the kind of person that if you had the pick, this is the one you would pick to represent you or be head of your team. Just building off what you're saying.
Yeah, I personally have lost confidence in Ann Taylor, and many would disagree with me on that. But I mean, I was right there in person. I didn't just hear what Ann Taylor had to say and what she was doing. I saw Ann Taylor in person. So I got the sense and the feeling, and it's just like, is Ann Taylor potentially going to be good, you know, when it comes to trial? Maybe. I don't have the confidence I once had in her. I don't think she's the bulldog I thought she was. Do I think that she'll be able to pull things out of witnesses from the prosecution? Yeah. Like I said, I think she's a dissector. I think that she has a game plan and she'll go attack it and accomplish what she can. I just have by far more confidence in Massa. Like I'm telling you, at the end of the day, if I was sitting in the defendant's chair in any case that I could potentially be facing, and Massoff was a choice for me to represent me, I would take it 110%. 110%.
I agree. So, wow. I don't know if I don't know if I have any response necessarily to that, but just like in the same sentiment, kind of like going along the lines of what you're talking, I saw a really interesting post recently from Andrea Burkhart. And I love watching her channel. And she was really, really pumping up. I actually could probably pull up the post right quick, but she was really saying something particular about Cy Ray's testimony coming up, that she really says that she's been seeing a lot of these things over the years going on prosecution side, and she stands behind him. It was such an interesting statement. Let me see if I can pull it up, just on the lines of defense attorneys that we were talking about. Did you happen to see that recently?
I haven't looked at anything in regards to this case in 2 weeks.
Let me pull this up. I grabbed it from Mishgirl. Sorry, I'm not trying to change the subject, but I just thought of that when you were saying it, that other defense lawyers are standing up. I don't know.
I just have a gut feeling. I hate to say this because I know it's not going to be a welcome thought process. I don't see Cy Ray being at this trial. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't see Cy Ray at the trial. I'm sure some of his things that he's helped the defense with will most likely be presented at trial, but I don't think it'll be him doing it.
Here, let me present. I just want to show the audience, if you don't mind, this one post, Andrea Burkhart. I thought this was just interesting. I just playing when we're talking about we're talking about defense attorneys right now. We have Andrea Burkhart, and she tweeted this just a couple days ago. I'll have a lot to say about the Bryan Kohberger motions in lemony. But for now, I can just say that I am here for Cy Ray after 30 years of supporting prosecutors, getting his first glimpse of what defenders see routinely and not liking it one bit. Welcome to the light, Mr. Ray. And then this was the quote that she had from Cy Ray's affidavit. In my nearly 30 years of working with and for prosecutors all over the United States, I have never witnessed such deliberate attempts by a prosecution to mislead the court in evidence in such plain sight. Anyone making such a claim would have to believe that the court is incapable of viewing physical evidence in possession of the state in defense. It rises to the level beyond the simple miscommunication oversight and is clear intentional misrepresentation of the hopes to conceal a much larger issue. I respectfully request the court to give this affidavit to its due attention it deserves and explore these issues further. I think that's just so powerful. I mean, we've got powerhouse Andrea Burkhart tweeting that about Cy. It's really interesting.
I have a lot of respect for Burkhart. She has a lot of amazing work that she's put in. I mean, hopefully she does dive in and shed a lot of light on how she feels about the motions in the minute. I would definitely like to hear what she has to say and what her thought process is, but hopefully she gets that out soon.
Yeah.
We'll see what the experts for the defense, what they're going to have. I mean, obviously you're going to have a vehicle expert that's going to take the stand. You're going to have all these different experts that are going to take the stand to try to prove Bryan Kohberger did not commit this crime. So, I mean, they're fighting for the innocence of Kohberger. What type of expert could they potentially put out there that's going to prove? I mean, we already see in the docs that they obviously have an expert that feels as though it's multi-weapon, multi-perp. So it's going to be very interesting to see the testimony and how they portray that and how they put that out there. But also, I think on the other side of that, one thing that's going to be very interesting to see is the prosecution going to bend a little bit and say, without saying words, but in body language, are they going to commit to the fact that Bryan Kohberger is only a part of what has happened? Or are they going to truly just try to prove that Bryan Kohberger is the one and only, which I think as a prosecution, just like I said, it's an uphill battle, in my opinion, for the defense to be able to prove who the multi-perps could potentially be. I think on the opposite side of that, the uphill climb for Bryan or for the prosecution against Bryan Kohberger is proving that this legitimately could be done by one person, one weapon, which they seem to have put all of their eggs in that basket. And, I like Cy Ray. I think he potentially has a lot to offer, and I like his background. I like everything about it. But when it comes to an alternative perp defense, I'm not sure what he potentially adds. And if that's the route, and that's why I say he may not be at trial, he may not testify, because if the defense can put together evidence and they can get through this hurdle with Judge Hippler for them to be able to present this at trial, they won't need Cy Ray because they'll be directly linking evidence to others, and that will be their attack. They won't have to prove that Bryan Kohberger was somewhere else.
Oh, yeah, if they have something, it's whatever they have. It just depends on what it is. And I kind of talked to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Somebody left the defense. I was curious, and I'd like to know what the chat thinks. I was wondering if it might be the DNA expert, because if you think about it, I mean, I'm just wondering what it is. I don't think it's, but I'm just wondering, because her argument was whether the words touch transfer were going to be used, whether they could be used anonymously. And the judges basically, if I understood when he was ruling from the stand, he was basically like, well, a jury gets the interchangeable terms and the difference, and it's unnecessary to, So I'm wondering if that's what the defense expert that was dropped. I don't know.
That would be very possible, considering you have Bicca Barlow. If it comes to that scenario, I don't think you literally could find anybody better than Bicca Barlow, and she's on your defense team. She's not going anywhere. So I think that if a DNA expert is not needed to explain certain terminology, yeah, that would probably be the person that would step away and say, well, you don't need me. I'm on call if you do, but I'm out of here. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that's what it is. And yeah, I don't know what the alternative suspect could be. And I don't, if it's not Cy that's bringing it to the table, they brought up, like you said, cameras on U of I campus. I think Ann Taylor also mentioned that the tip line had something to do with it as well. So I don't know. And so I see Rolo in the chat. It does make me think about vehicle authentication. Rolo, one of the conversations that we had early on is like, there were going to be experts, and this is going to be something that we're all paying attention to on the stand, is these identification experts about the video evidence that they have, these authentication experts. This is going to be, I think, a major battle on the stand between experts. When we first heard the tip about the white car, it was the multiple occupants of a white Elantra. It's going to be interesting because they're going to have to place Bryan in the car, number one, I'm assuming. And number two, some of the footage actually implied there were more people involved. And then just back to what you're saying about the multiple perp theory, are they going to try to say Bryan was partially part of this or all of it? Well, time is going to be another factor in that. As they said before, the amount of time it took to commit the crime is going to be a huge factor of whether they're going to, I think, say that Bryan worked by himself or alone, whatever the prosecution is going to say.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something to really watch, because if the defense starts pushing multi-perp, and these things, well, the prosecution can transition with that as well and say, hey, look, we've stated from the very beginning we were looking for the occupants of a vehicle, and we just happened to stumble upon Mr. Kohberger, who we believe is potentially a perp in a multi-perp, and we're still investigating others. Because if they make that transition, Swamp, if the prosecution is willing to go that route and concede, just like the defense seems to now have conceded that the DNA found on the knife sheath is potentially Bryan Kohberger's, so they're not conceding how it got there. They're just conceding that's most likely his.
Right.
Well, the prosecution can now kind of, well, of course, we're still investigating. Bryan Kohberger did say when he was arrested in Pennsylvania, did you arrest anybody? They could start twisting the transitional narrative to fit more people and say Bryan is only one of a handful of people, but he's still guilty of X, Y, and Z. And that's why we've charged him and we're expecting the death penalty. So now they've transitioned into a way that's better to connect Kohberger to this. And I'm interested to see if they do make that transition. And a lot of that will also rely on, where does Ann Taylor go if it's not looking good about the white Elantra being in the neighborhood? If it starts becoming quite clear that legitimately could be Bryan Kohberger's car, does she transition and, like the sheath DNA, just start to say, yeah, that's his. He was in the neighborhood, but he wasn't there for that reason? I mean, that's a bad sign if that happens. That's a very bad sign.
But I just feel like it's so too late for that. I don't know what circumstance that would happen, but I mean, it would have to be from a complete lack of communication. Yeah, I just can't imagine that happening. But just to go back to what you're saying, is the defense going to say, oh, is this, is Bryan partial? The prosecution going to say Bryan is partial or all responsible for this? I actually am looking at this totally differently. I think there would be public outrage if they were to say that he was part of the crime, because that would mean that all of us have been living for nearly 3 years with an extreme offenders walking around that committed this crime. It'd be outrageous. It
What
would
if
be,
they're not walking around?
well, let's discuss that.
What if they're in federal jail and they don't have to release names of people arrested federally? You know that, right? Like they could literally have a second person, in this case, they charge federally, that's sitting in federal detainment. They don't have to mention. You'll never see a court document. You'll never see the court because they can keep that completely private. A lot of people don't think about that. One could be the main perp that committed the crime sitting in federal holding because they were able to charge him federally. And Bryan Kohberger's just going through the steps of the second multiple perp. And that's where the angle for the defense is going to be, well, you got the wrong people. You got the wrong people. We need the informant. We need to know who else could have potentially been arrested. We need to know all this. We need to get into the federal grand jury. We need all the subpoenas. And guess what? They're battling.
I mean, the only thing like that makes me think back to that second motion for discovery that the defense made, where it says, and we always thought it was like verbiage to kind of like suss out any IGG info, but it said they wanted information on co-defendants, and that was the one time we heard the word co-defendant. And I mean, I guess I didn't really speculate on somebody being in custody, like in federal prison, just simply for the fact that I would think the name would have come out by now, but I don't know. But, and guys, I know this is going to split the room, and some people aren't going to like me saying this, but I wasn't the one who implicated in this crime. I remember on the footage from the 15th of December when they pulled over Bryan Kohberger and his father. And I actually have 2 points, and then I'll toss it to you. And Bryan Kohberger's father, when trying to describe where he was coming from, brought up the other BK and the incredible nationwide coverage going on of the police intervention and ultimately shooting of the other BK. And it was only 13 minutes from this other crime that had garnered international attention. And Bryan Kohberger's own father brought that name up. So, I mean, I tread lightly when I bring it up, but it is so mysterious and the timing is incredible. I mean, when I first heard about it, I was just taken back, like, whoa, you know. Well, I'll toss it to you with that, and then I'll go into my second point.
No, and I agree with you. You know, at the end of the day, I think to solve this crime, you have to figure out the connection between, if you feel like somebody else committed this crime, you need to find the connection between that individual or individuals and Bryan Kohberger, because it's very odd the way that they got to Kohberger. And trust me, I've been the one that screams the loudest regarding the investigation in this case. I think it's ridiculous. And then, you know, the bigger screams need to be had about the sealing and the redacting and the hiding of everything. Like, this could have all been resolved so long ago if this case wasn't sealed and redacted to the point that it is. Get the information out there. I know everybody says, well, you'll sour the jury pool. Well, that's potentially happening anyway. Get the info out there, get the truth out there. And Steve G's absolutely right when he says, put the truth out there and shut everybody up. Yeah, do it. Whatever evidence you got, if you got another person in detainment, if whatever you think, if you got a weapon that you found that's now considered the second weapon, put it all out there. Get it all out in the open, and let's get moving on this, because the speculation and the narratives, I think, are just doing more damage, not only to the people, around this case family wise, but I mean, for God's sakes, it's tearing apart a community of people that just love true crime. Now everybody literally has to fight with each other. They got to get, calling each other names and putting out personal information. And let's just get moving forward. Let's figure out whether Bryan Kohberger did this, didn't do this, get it in front of a jury, put up the real evidence, and let's quit BSing.
I have to make a correction to the record. I'm being corrected in the chat. Thank you very much to my mods for keeping me on my toes. Bryan Kohberger's father absolutely, according to my mods, did not say the other BK's name. He said there was a shooting incident at the school. So thank you for correcting me in real time. I appreciate it. I think of one other, we have the alternative suspect hearing coming up. One thing comes to my mind with Bryan Kohberger's offense is, okay, so if Ann Taylor has to come up with an alternative suspect, that's essentially having to build like a parallel investigation. There's the other issue, which is an alibi of Bryan Kohberger. We talk about what the alibi could be, right? I want to remind my audience of an article that actually Twiz brought to me, and I brought this article up several times, where the arresting officers for Bryan Kohberger, one of the first quotes out of his mouth is, "Do they have my GPS?" And to me, that metadata, what's in that sealed celebrate warrant, is so it could be his. Could the alibi be stronger than the alternative defense theory? I mean, we really don't know what's going to come out. And Cy Ray has said Bryan Kohberger wasn't there. That's when I, maybe I'm conflating alternative suspect and alibi, but it just, is that alibi going to be enough, that they don't have to have a parallel investigation and an alternative suspect?
Well, let me present this to you because, you and I have had a little bit of discussion in regards to the narratives and the people, conspiracy and all these different things. And I'm never one that wants to chop down people's opinions or thoughts, because I think it's important to be unique and think outside the box and do all of that. But you have to fully understand, if Bryan Kohberger's phone had the GPS that showed he was not at this crime scene, Ann Taylor would no longer be arguing this case in the state court in Ada County. She would be at the doorstep of the Supreme Court with this information, getting Bryan Kohberger released from jail. I don't think people need to legitimately, they have to understand, the entirety of the United States of America is not a conspiracy theory to convict Bryan Kohberger of this case. Our Supreme Court would have already seen this very evidence. He would not be sitting in jail. I mean, I'm sorry that people don't realize this is not the biggest conspiracy theory ever concocted in a quadruple homicide. Not every branch of the United States government is involved in this. I don't know where. I don't want people to think like I'm screaming Bryan Kohberger's guilty. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is, a lot of this conspiracy stuff that gets thrown around, it just doesn't have backing. It doesn't have backing.
Well, I guess my question would, thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate you saying that. I guess my question would be, after hearing that, is like, well, isn't the first, and I'm asking legitimately, like, isn't the first step to bringing this to the Supreme Court, like, other than, the venue change, isn't it trying to bring up these issues to see if there is a Brady Giglio violation with the Franks hearing? And I do feel that maybe personally, from what I witnessed, I was surprised by this like baby Franks hearing they had, where it didn't feel like the seriousness to what the allegations didn't feel like they were taken seriously, like with a Franks hearing. And then I see Cy Ray's affidavit, and the scope of it really has nothing to even do with this testimony for Bryan Kohberger. It's really all about how they constructed the probable cause. So like for me, I don't know, because I don't know if the Supreme Court just comes in and plucks things, or if Frank's hearings are involved, or if it's all done on appeal, or if the Supreme Court already has eyes on Hitler this whole time because, you know, it was venue change, like you were, have mentioned to me before. I don't know, but I just know, I don't know what the process is for Supreme Court involvement. If it's like Supreme Court just jumping in, or if it's like, let's get a Franks, let's feel this out. I don't know. You tell me, but I thought the first step would be Franks, and it was denied. And no sides out for blood. Sorry.
The defense would motion, first they have to motion Hitler, just like they first had to motion to judge to try to get before the Supreme Court in the past in regards to whatever they wanted to argue with the Supreme Court when it was over in Judge's arena. Now it's in Hitler's. So the very first step would, well, we got a motion to Judge Hitler that we want to step in front of the Idaho Supreme Court. Hitler can deny that. He can say, no, I'm not going to allow that. The next step is to file directly to the Supreme Court and say, we want to step before you to make this argument. Then it's up to the Supreme Court to say, okay, we want to hear it. They don't have to. They can turn it down. They don't have to do anything. If the Idaho Supreme Court turns it down, then it can go to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's the national, that's the federal Supreme Court. That's very difficult to get in front of. Like if you've been turned down by state and then, by the local federal there in Idaho, then it's going to be very hard to get in front of the national Supreme Court. But that's what appeals and everything that, if Bryan Kohberger was convicted, he would absolutely, there's no doubt he's guaranteed appeals. It's going all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that's going to be heard. But what I'm saying is, if Bryan Kohberger's cell phone was utilized as evidence, and the defense who gets this evidence says, hey, look, right here, we have the GPS. He was not there. He was not there. Here it is. And Judge Hitler says, I'm not going to even look at this. No, that's not evidence, but it's a part of the discoverable evidence. It goes right from there. Ann Taylor would go right to the Idaho Supreme Court and say, we have evidence that showcases this case is false. And if it was something of that nature, that they have direct proof that Bryan Kohberger, GPS coordinates, he was not at that crime scene, he was somewhere else, the Supreme Court would hear that immediately. Because now you're housing a potentially very innocent man that has evidence that he's innocent. I'm sorry, I don't see it. I don't see it. I believe Bryan Kohberger's phone was off. They don't have GPS coordinates at the time of this crime that would showcase him somewhere else. I'm not saying he wasn't somewhere else or they couldn't prove it. It's just not in his cell phone. It's not.
Okay. Oh my gosh. I totally am so glad you're bringing this up, AR, because I think I've sent you text messages about this, like my baffling thoughts about the Celebrate data that's being suppressed right now, and not suppressed, that's under seal right now. And the reason is because I'm like the opposite. It's like the opposite argument for me. It's like, what the F? That Celebrate data should be they should know his coordinates. It's so accurate. So for me, this is where I'm actually gonna split the room again, you guys. I'm sorry. And this isn't about conspiracy theory. This is about what tactics the defense is gonna use for alternative suspect. If she is saying her client is innocent and she's going with an alternative suspect, that means somebody had to have inadvertently or purposefully implicated Bryan, right? So for me, when I find out that Celebrate data should be so strong that if it shows Bryan Kohberger is there, I mean, he wouldn't have much other choice but to plea out, but he's not. And they've had this. I mean, his quote when he got arrested is, "Don't you have my GPS data?" So
how do you know that was specifically quoted? Is that in court documents? Has this been argued in the court? I'm just asking because I didn't know he said that.
I will tell you, no, it's not in court documents, but the quote is legit. It comes from Jason Labar, and it's his quote to the media source. But even putting that aside, let's say he never said that. Just the thought that if they have the GPS data, that should prove where he is, right? So if they had something concrete that showed that he was somewhere, I'm building off what you're saying, I'm not contradicting, building that he was there, like he would have pleaded out by now, but they don't. And it goes the opposite way too. They can't prove that he was not there or what I'm getting at is, if Anna's going with an alternative suspect theory, is she going to say that somebody, because the only way you guys, you can't change this data. It's not something you can alter. Like you can't say you were somewhere else and manipulate it. The only way that you can mess up this data is to override it. And there are apps and whatnot that can overwrite these. So my question is Anne going to say somebody messed with this data? Because this data has to be there or not. And I don't know if turning off the phone actually would do it. I think you actually, I mean, from what I understand, you actually, that information's still there. The only way it couldn't be there is if it was altered. And are we going to think, is she going to say that somebody was in Bryan Kohberger's phone? I don't know, but it's just weird we don't have this info. You would think it would prove or not prove something. And the fact that there's nothing about it out there, and we're even arguing the timing. I mean, Twiz, you tell me, we're arguing, where Bryan Kohberger's phone was, but yet you would think the Celebrate data would negate all of this immediately. There has to be something wrong with it, is my point. There's something wrong with this data, I think. I don't know. You tell me, you guys. I'll shut up.
Or there's possibly just no data. I mean, I haven't heard Ann Taylor or them argued about it out loud until I guess you're saying now maybe they're bringing it up. I mean, I don't know much about that stuff. I just personally, being through the arrest and all of these things, we're going on 3 years. And if there was actual exculpatory evidence being provable, we wouldn't be sitting where we're at right now. I mean, I do understand that cases get solved later and people are found innocent of the crime. So that's why I say we have to go with innocent until proven guilty. And all these arguments are great, but that's what we're going to learn at trial. We're going to understand these things better, hopefully, at trial. But my biggest stomping of my feet is kind of backing up what you're saying in regards to this, because we've already seen that this judge is okay with just saying, oh, we don't need to discuss how we got to Bryan Kohberger. We say the narrative is a tip. So now we don't have to discuss the IGG process. The actual jury doesn't hear the truth behind everything that could potentially be wrong with that, the potentially coming in the back door, the sketchiness of this. So is there a possibility there's many other things that could be brought to the table? Sure. Will they be? I don't know. He's already ruled that certain things don't have to be. So it's potentially he wouldn't even allow that type of stuff to be spoken of either. We'll see.
Yeah, we will. I mean, it goes back to like when we hear one of the attorney's job is to the defense team's job isn't just to prove Bryan Kohberger's innocence, it's to make sure that the heavy hand of the state doesn't weigh too heavy down on her client. And it just feels like, I don't know.
Well, it's not even the defense's job to prove innocence. It's the defense's job to defend their client against the accusations of guilt by the prosecution. So legitimately, right now, Ann Taylor is just weeding through all the crap that's been given to her by the prosecution, defending her client. The real battle happens at trial. Because if the prosecution's not willing to step to the plate to say they made a mistake, that they made an arrest that shouldn't have happened, that the investigation isn't quite as proper as they thought it would be, they would dismiss charges because they could always bring them up later. They don't want to go to trial and lose to a not guilty verdict. They would either rather dismiss charges right now to build the case stronger or pursue the actual legitimate purpose of the crime, or they're going to take their chances of trying it and then a mistrial happens, which still does not hurt the prosecution. They just refile charges and we get right back to the same point. All I'm saying as an individual that looks at this with a very open-mindedness is not everybody in the United States is conspiring against Bryan Kohberger to get a conviction in this case. For so many people, and I look at everybody that leaves comments and everybody talks about this, and I'm so appreciative of everybody that works with us, Kiki, all of our subscribers, all the people that communicate with us. They all matter, whether we agree with their opinion or disagree. They all matter. But what gets to me is not everything is a conspiracy. Not everybody's being paid off. Not everything is happening that is so corrupt. I mean, we legitimately have to hit the pause button and allow Ann Taylor and Massoff to do the due diligence to represent their client, and they're doing that. But we also have to take into consideration the prosecution's not trying this case to the point we're at right now with nothing. I've said it before in the past. I think many people have. We felt like this case had no evidence. We felt as though it was a very weak circumstantial case. I still stand that way. I still think that this case is being prosecuted in a nature that should not be happening. Like, I don't agree with the prosecution of this case at all, or the means that they got to Bryan Kohberger. I think this is just, and I've used the word disgusting. It's heart-wrenching. It makes you sick to your stomach. That's why people step away from this case and stop talking about it and stop watching YouTube, is because it is disgusting in that sense. But I mean, I do sit here not as a person that's claiming innocence or guilt, but I sit here as an individual that says, I don't think we'd be at this very point knowing that Massoff and Ann Taylor dig into everything, that we'd still be sitting here with this moving towards trial if Bryan Kohberger could be proven to have been somewhere else. Now, could you potentially raise the issue that Bryan Kohberger was somewhere else and didn't commit this crime? Sure. But if there was legitimate, provable, 100% proof that 4 a.m. until 4:30 a.m., Bryan Kohberger was at Denny's on Central Boulevard, we wouldn't even be here doing this. Don't try to get me to say Bryan Kohberger's innocent because at 2:55 a.m., 7-minute difference, he was driving in a certain direction when the crime happened at 4 a.m. That's just where I stand. That's where I feel. And trust me, I fight for our rights. I fight for innocent until proven guilty. And I have not found this kid guilty. I have not found him guilty. I'm not even one that wants to listen to, well, he bought a mask in Pennsylvania a year before the crime. I don't want to hear that crap. I don't care. I don't even want to hear he bought a K-bar knife a year in advance in Pennsylvania and had a K-bar knife delivered to his house. I don't care. That's not proving guilt to me. That means nothing to me. But I do need to start seeing something step up to the plate that legitimately points and says, this is exactly how Bryan Kohberger is innocent 100%. 100%. These other two DNA matches found at the crime scene come back to convicted murderers that were let out early on parole, and we matched them in CODIS, and we know they were at the crime scene. We have tips about them. We know for a fact their blood is here. Now we can open up the conversation. That little bit of DNA, that little bit of stuff on the knife sheath means nothing compared to a blood from a potential perp to me. Like I can't convict Bryan Kohberger on touch DNA found on knife sheath button on a movable object. Come on, no jury's gonna convict on that. None. No jury's going to convict on a potential sighting of a white car driving the neighborhood if they can't put Bryan Kohberger in that white car. You know the only way they can put Bryan Kohberger in that car? There's only a couple of ways. You actually have video footage of him in the car at the scene, meaning you have legitimate footage of Bryan Kohberger at the crime scene. Or two, you found the victim's DNA in the car. There's only two ways you can prove Bryan Kohberger was in that car at the crime scene. I don't care what type of white Hyundai Elantra you see driving around, okay? Many people drive white Hyundai Elantras. Prove to me Bryan Kohberger was in that damn car. Or prove to me that DNA or evidence left that crime scene and was in that car. That's the other way you're going to prove to me his car was circling the crime scene. Sorry, I got you thinking over there. You're scribbling on paper.
Yeah, I hope I like it to the, I love your raw response and your honest response and how you don't hold back. And I appreciate that. And I just have a couple of points I want to bring up when you said that. So one thing is, and I think it was Jen, and I don't know if she's referencing AT as well or the defense like I am, but I do feel at this point, particularly with those potential Brady Giglio violations, not even getting the Franks hearing that we really thought they were, but going as far as to entertaining the Franks hearing, to me, I'm wondering if Ann Taylor now, whatever she has, whatever little bit she has right now, if she is holding those cards very close to her chest and not indicating anything more to us here out in the public. So why? So they can rip it apart and ruin everything that the defense that they want to give to the jury. If it's not alternative suspect and it's not alibi, and they really do have some other defense, why bring it out in open court? Keep that mouth shut. We don't know what she's going to ask balance in voir dire. There are things. And the other thing I want to bring up is, like, you guys, I get that, this will not turn into me talking about the survivors. As far as I'm concerned, I wanted to hear their testimony. I wanted this. I was asking for this. But one thing that has come up in these newest documents that I cannot get past is there are indications of a cleanup, and that really throws things off for me. Number one, Tonka keeps bringing up the timeline. It's the timeline that I have a problem with, and I'm not indicating nefarious activity. I could be indicating mistake or issues with a parallel investigation that we just recently learned about. But the fact is, there was a cleanup, and if that was the perp, that does bring questions to me about the timeline. Doesn't mean the case is ruined. It means I have curiosity. I have questions. But number two, if there's a cleanup, it does go back to, okay, if that was the surviving roommates of the house who cleaned up, that pulls into question several things. The way that you were talking on the phone about not knowing what's going on in the house. You were pulling a fast one on us, then, just, I'm not saying that. I'm posing a curiosity question. If you knew about the crime and you pretended because you cleaned up, and then you were on a line saying you didn't know what was going on, somebody was unconscious, that indicates that you didn't tell the truth. I'm just saying, I'm not coming down the survivor. I'm just saying, like, to me, it's like, okay, we might not know what, I just, it's for me, I can't say, this is it. No, like, her hands were on Bryan Kohberger's shoulder. She said, he's innocent. And I heard what Ray said, and I just can't do it. I can't bring I have come this far being swayed in all directions, and I'm going to hold fast to I'm doing my best to not form a bias, even though I know I have a bias, because obviously I'm very fond of Ray, because he really did help save my channel from having, I could have had we won't go into details, but it could have been I could have had a really bad interview if he hadn't helped me vet a guest. Number one, so I have some bias because I really appreciate his character, him and his wife, their time, and I know they're good people for what they did to me. I had the incredibly smart Dr. Ramslin on my channel talking about her body of work, nothing to do with the case, but I bring her name up because I read in a book stuff that I just like, how could the author possibly know any of these things? Like, so I've seen the bias, and most specifically, like, I've seen what are perceived attacks on the Kohberger family. And again, I know there are I don't know, but when it comes down to it, it's very hard for me to think that we would know what his defense is going to be, or if it's all been thrown out the window, because I think at a certain point when that Frank's hearing wasn't called, that was it. They're not going to show their cards. They're just going to try to get the things they need in place to talk about this, and they're going to say as little as possible. And I think that's why we see these major moves, like, okay, you don't give us your alibi, you don't tell us where you were, you can't bring up any alternative suspect, there you go. You know what I mean? Like, they're really trying to get her to show the cards, and she won't. And I mean, it's just how I feel. I don't know if it's actually, what's going on. But again, when you see, like, it's almost like she has to build an investigation or a case rather than just create that reasonable doubt. Now, the job should be that he comes up, they show the evidence, he tells his side of the story. But that's not what's going on here. It's more like, we have to find a narrative. And now we have to test the narrative out in the media, because obviously this case is 100 being tried in the court of public opinion. Nobody cares about innocent till proven guilty to a cross-section of Bryan Kohberger's peers. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit ranting right now, but I'll stop and toss it to you.
Well, I think you have every reason to rant. Two of the people that you have built actually a little bond with, being Mr. Ray and also Ramslin, you've had the privilege to work with those individuals. So, of course, you're going to be very protective of that. And I've screamed, trust me, I'm right there with you. I think they're being treated in the most inappropriate way when it comes to this trial. I think it's dismal. I think it just legitimately should never go this route, because now what that to me shows is your case is such desperation that you have to literally attack good people. You have to attack people that have strove in life to be honest, work hard, put in even 30 years worth of dedication in law enforcement to keep our community safe and protected, and continuing to move forward, even involving your wife at this very point, which I believe Cy Ray's wife comes across as one of the most highly intelligent people with a great personality that you could bump into. I think she's a great addition to Cy Ray as a person and to showing the honesty and the integrity. And I'm 100% intrigued enough that, to even say what I said earlier. I don't listen to people. I don't pay enough attention. I pay attention to both of them. I think they're great individuals. I don't know anything about Ramsey. I know nothing about her. I don't even really have interest of reaching out or learning. I know that she's dedicated herself to her trade and to what she does. That's appropriate. I just don't feel it's proper to be attacked in the manner that these individuals have been attacked. And what's even worse is the court has allowed it to happen. And on top of that, have added to the attack. And that's, our court should never be that way. No judge should ever speak the way that Hitler did in regards to Cy Ray. And that's something that I hope is dealt with outside of the vision by a higher court stepping in to sanction what happened and literally punish those involved in that. I think that outside of the alternative perp discussion, I think the biggest battle that's going to happen in this courtroom, it doesn't come down to the make and model of the vehicle. It doesn't come down to, the purchase of the weapons. It's going to be the timeline. The timeline is going to be the battle. And I agree with your moderator, Tonka, when they directly speak about timeline. That makes or breaks this case in all directions, both prosecution and defense. If the defense can prove this crime happened at a different time than what prosecutors are willing to put out there, that ends the case right there. It's not guilty. You're on a false narrative of a timeline, which opens the door to everybody else potentially being involved, including the surviving roommates. Because now you bring in time to clean up and you go back to the state's timeline, there's no time for that. There is no time for an individual perp to take the lives of 4 individuals, clean up, drive around, and do all of this. It doesn't make sense. It didn't happen that way. Not based on that time. And if there's proof, if the defense can put an expert out there that rings a bell to the jury, because remember, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. You got to make it make sense to the jury, and you've got to keep them captivated and interested in what you're saying enough to weigh their opinions and their thoughts based upon what you're saying. And if it rings true to them, they're going to side with you. And I think the timeline is something that most, if they were open-minded and sitting in a jury and were led to believe that the entirety of this crime was a handful of minutes and they had time to do all these other things that don't make sense, the jury's going to boot that. They're going to find Bryan Kohberger not guilty based upon the fact the prosecution couldn't prove a timeline. So that's a great argument, and I'm glad that your mod, is very, very direct in speaking about the timeline. And I know you have been as well. You've done a lot of work into timeline. You've put a lot of work into timeline, far more so than many others that I watch. And I give you a lot of credit because that's hard work. Take a minute and just think about the 2 a.m. hours, the dark hour, and that's stated by a victim's family member that now we're finding out the victims potentially, Xana and Ethan weren't even home when they were said to be at home. That changes timeline by itself. How is the prosecution able to commit to a timeline when it's clearly being stated that the very time that they set, all these individuals were at home. They were all here. Well, that's false. It's not true. Your timeline just changed.
And as far as I'm concerned, the timeline changed once that 911 transcript or the text messages were released. And I want to say something about the timeline too. When it comes to those authentication records that we all saw released, the camera authentication records, some of the things that were striking to me was, number one, some of the cameras that weren't authenticated, and don't even get me started on the 712 cam, but some of the cameras that were authenticated and weren't used. For instance, the balcony cam. I'm obsessed with the freaking balcony cam. Murphy, I mean, even in this most recent interview we saw with the victim's father, talking about the possibility of Murphy running out that sliding glass door. If there's someone with a balcony freaking cam that got suspect vehicle 1, what's in between the balcony and suspect vehicle 1? The house. What's on the audio? Dog barking, and then we hear that Ann Taylor saying there's no audio. Well, what does that mean? That camera that was 50 feet from Xana's room is no longer going to be used in court? And if it isn't, and what I'm getting at is, when it comes to these cameras, the authenticated cameras, and it comes to a timeline and cleanup and all these things, how does it affect, and it's a curious question for everyone, how does that affect Bryan Kohberger's defense if certain cameras are excluded from the timeline? For instance, because when we talk, like, I've taken that timeline and put it in like a linear fashion. Like, I've put it on in a Word document in order. I'll post it tomorrow at some point. One of the things that struck me is that, remember the gas station cam that was released of the car speeding away? That isn't being used. Now, I'm not saying that's a quality picture, or it should or shouldn't be used. My point is this. When I included that by accident, and when I accidentally included that camera, the timeline was nearly effing, it was so hard. Like, that timeline was so, like, I mean, it meant that that car had to basically get, like, it really threw the timeline off by at least 3 minutes. Like, it just almost made it impossible. So tight. I could even, I have it here. If you give me a minute, I'll pull it up. But that's a big deal for me. And just going back to the cleanup, you throw the cleanup in there, and we know the time the perpetrator entered the home. So, like, how do all these things, and if Ann Taylor just brings in one more authenticated camera that throws off that timeline, how does it affect it? And just going back to Dr. Ramsland, yeah, it is heartbreaking when you read in the chat what, I'm sorry, like, you know what? Carrie Ray goes right after the queen. I'll go right after her too. This is sensationalism. It is absolute BS to take. If that's true, if these theories that she's posing, these irresponsible theories, that's like vilifying a woman who's dedicated her life to law enforcement, not just regular, petty crime law enforcement. We are talking about pure evil. A woman who literally walks in places angels won't tread to get us. This woman could be anywhere, and she chose to do these profiles. And the attacks are just outrageous. A woman who's dedicated her life to law enforcement like this, to hear that Nancy Gray, I'm not even going to repeat what the chat is saying Nancy Disgrace said about her, but whatever. Our audience is too intelligent to listen to absolute rumors and innuendos of somebody who should be, first off, considered innocent until proven guilty, to speculate on a motive like that, an unproven motive when you don't even know a connection to the victims. It's so disparaging to read. It's despicable.
And at the end of the day, the reason why these attacks are happening is because the investigation did not live up to the expectations to be able to prove this case without doubt. That's where my biggest concern is this case will forever have doubt. it's just hard to watch that the courts are shutting that down. I mean, we should have damn well had a Franks hearing. There's no question that just to protect the integrity of the case, you do the Franks hearing. You go and grant it, you do it, you get the information out about it, and then it's better understood whether there literally was or wasn't. So that makes sense. You know, I don't think in all of the cases I've legitimately kind of paid attention to and followed, I don't think I've ever heard of a case that did not have some sort of suppressed evidence in it, and this one had none. Motions in limine, I've never seen a case where such an important aspect of the investigation as what the IGG investigation of this case was. I've never seen a agreement to exclude it by the defense and the prosecution. It's just excluded. Don't worry about it. And I get that. And I want to say a quick thank you to Jeremy for the 5 gifted Swamp Rose memberships. That's amazing. We truly appreciate you. But the attacks are just adding on to the lack of credibility of everything that we're all like. We're not all dumb. We're not all just blind to what's happening here. And outside of that, there are people that are far more even experienced or knowledgeable than I that have been through the system and through the court process and through all of this that can truly speak up with their voices. And I hope many do come to the table and do that and say, this isn't how this works. Like every show you guys are seeing that's happening before your eyes, this isn't how this works. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what more to say. And like I said, I'm not one that's pounding my fist for innocence, but I'm also not one that's willing to say that this is an appropriate prosecution and they got the right person without a doubt, and then they're handling this perfectly all the way through. This has been BS from the beginning. This has been a hide and seek show with evidence. It's been disrespectful to experts, like literal experts are being disrespected at the highest level possible. I'm watching juvenile attorney by the prosecution side that I think people should be highly upset watching. It's like juvenile delinquents trying to try a case for the prosecution, where you got Santa Claus and Ashley Jennings, that these are not the professional people that you want handling a case in this view of the eyes. I'm sorry, everybody. I didn't notice I wasn't in my little circle here. I probably need to make my little circle bigger. But, you know, that this is not the showcase that you want to see in a capital case that legitimately is going to take someone's life at the end of the day if he's found guilty. And what's even more frustrating is I just there's such a mountain that has to be climbed by this defense team and Bryan Kohberger that I don't think they've made it a quarter of the way up yet. And I'm not sure they can get halfway. And that's hard to swallow as well.
When you say that, it makes me think of, and I go off the most current information. I really try to build off that, but it makes me think of this most recent interview with Steve Gonsalves and the way that he talked about parallel investigations. And, you know, one of the things that struck me was one of the mysteries from the beginning, because we didn't know if this was some sort of tactic to, I don't know, persuade the public or suss someone out. But from the beginning, we've had questions about this LinkedIn account, right? The one that Olivia was telling us about very early on. And one of the interesting things that Steve Gonsalves said in this recent interview is he's like, well, you know, we confronted Moscow PD and we're like, what is going on in Kaylee's LinkedIn account? And he's like, oh, well, he's like, I know they had no idea. I could just tell by their look. They looked at me like I had 12, I'm paraphrasing, like I had 12 heads, right? And then he said he found out later on that it was the FBI, and it was because there were parallel investigations going on. And I think back to that May 30th hearing with Payne on the stand and Balance handing over the FBI text messages. Now, I've heard people say in my comment section, oh, well, that was part of discovery, right? The FBI and all the investigators handed over their text messages as part of the case. No, that's not what Ann Taylor said. She said she did not want to submit these into evidence. They were something she personally acquired. I mean, I could be wrong. I just know what I've been, researched. So you guys can correct me. But the point is there was a parallel investigation of some sorts. And to me, hearing him confirm that with the FBI story, that makes me think back to Payne being on the stand saying, where's the work product that you were initially doing? And he says, well, I was relying on smarter people than me who had more experience. Well, it kind of sounds like to me you were relying on the parallel investigation you weren't supposed to, and probably to produce your own product afterwards. And is that what Sai is saying? Like, okay, well, where are the warrants? When did they exactly have Bryan Kohberger's name? When, is there something in that documentation of the timeline of gathering evidence, that whole chain of custody, that's really the big deal here? I don't know. But the parallel investigations to me play a huge role, having that confirmed, because it means that a little investigation was going on over here, a little over there. What was said off the record, on the record, what was meant to be part of the probable cause maybe, and what was meant to be big emergency here. Let's get this extreme offender off the street. What can we figure out who this guy is? But this isn't good for court. I don't know, but it does seem like the conflation comes from this parallel investigation, because we heard right out of the victim's family's mouth, they had no idea what was going on with their daughter's LinkedIn account. And they were left in the dark about that for quite a long time till it was confirmed it was the FBI. If the investigators in Moscow didn't know that, who were leading up the investigation, what else don't they know? Like, what don't, I don't know. It opens up a can of worms, so to speak, for me when he talked about the parallel investigations. I'll stop. Sorry, guys.
I mean, I'll kind of just preface, how I feel about this. I wouldn't take a lot of what Steve G said as accurate. I mean, I heard many of the things that he said during that interview that were far from accurate. And that's been, unfortunately, what has happened the entirety of the 2.5 years, is we've heard things that just are not accurate, and it just continues today. Today it just continues, and it's too bad. It's too bad. And it's not that I'm defending anybody. I think he has the right to be protective of his daughter and his family, and if he wants to speak, he's right. He has the capability to do so. But I also fully agree with a lot of people out there that he's on a literal campaign to be as visual and as heard as possible. And a lot of people don't think it's tilting the scales, but it absolutely is. It absolutely is. Well, and just to kind of let you know, Kiki, I'm wearing down just a little bit. So if we can maybe wrap it up in 10 minutes or so, that'd be great.
That's good. I also want to take a moment. I see we have we have so many people in the chat. I just want to say the chat's been incredible tonight. I know a lot of people are coming in and out. We know there's a lot of great people on YouTube right now live streaming. We really appreciate your inviting us into your living rooms to hear what we have to say tonight. The chat is amazing, and you're bringing up so many good points and keeping the conversation going. I just had to take a minute to say my appreciation, both to my chat and AR's chat. I can see them both, and thank you to our mods again. But yeah, we'll wrap up in the next 10 minutes. I know I'm kind of fading a little bit too.
I'm just getting old, and you just had a birthday, so you got a year younger. So that's not fair. I can't keep up with you when you keep getting younger and I keep getting older.
You know how that works, guys, right?
Definitely. So
I had an amazing birthday. I decided not to trail off conversation. I did decide to travel into the city, and I tried a new Italian restaurant, and it was kind of cool. I went to Hyannis. I'm just gonna tell you, I went to a place called Alberto's in Hyannis, and it's funny because in New Hampshire, one of our favorite Italian restaurants is called Alberto's. We've both been going there since we were kids, and we call it Bats. So our big joke now is we found the Bats of Cape Cod. It's in Hyannis. You guys have to look it up. It was really good. I highly recommend it sometime. Sorry.
yeah, I mean, you sent me pictures, and I wanted to just like all of a sudden become a birthday boy myself to be able to go enjoy something like that too. But see, where I come from, Alberto's is typically Mexican food. It's not typically Italian, but that's the East Coast, and I can't wait. I mean, legitimately, Jen and I have a plan. We're going to get to that East Coast, and we're going to pack our stuff and move to the East Coast. We're going to be pretty excited to do it. We don't know when it's going to happen or when we're going to be on that move, but it will be pretty exciting to do that. Get away from the West Coast for a while. So
come to the East Coast, you guys. This is, I shouldn't say it. This is, I want to get to I love the West Coast. Don't get me wrong. I've spent, so, and, the area that we talk about, and I know you've spent time out in the Northwest as well. I've never myself been to Idaho, but I've lived in Oregon for a while, and it was incredible. I love that area. I've been to Washington many times, and
one of my favorite places in the world is Seaside, Oregon. I just love Seaside, Oregon, and one of the big things out there is the kites that they fly, and it's right on the ocean with a mountain and a wooded backdrop. Great camping. It's pretty exciting. Pretty exciting.
Like when I lived in Portland, we drove all the way out to the coast, and I believe like we went straight to the coast, like a big group of us. This was back like in my early 20s, and we ended up at a place, not to totally hijack the conversation. We ended up at a place called Haystacks Rocks. I mean, we didn't just end up there. They planned the trip. I wasn't part of the planning, but we went to this place called Haystacks Rock, and I have all these pictures in front of it. It's where they filmed Goonies. The kids movie Goonies. The scene where like they're all sailing away in the big boat? That's Haystacks Rocks. But the coast is so beautiful with the jagged cliffs and just like the clear water. It's always like got like a really like calm like vibe with it's like a perpetual storm in Oregon for like 4 months of the year. I don't know. Like they don't have winter. They have like this storm that just sits there and never leaves.
I saw somebody in the chat said, come to Minnesota. I love Minnesota. I used to go pike fishing in Minnesota. There was a little town called, I believe it was Alexandria or something of that nature, that was absolutely beautiful. And my sister's husband was from Minnesota. So the times we got to go back and visit when I was younger, I always said, I could live here. I could live here. Then the snow hit and the cold hit. And I said, I can't live here. I can't live here. So, that's one concern I have. But again, we're going to get wrapping up. And I know, Swamp, I truly appreciate you joining me tonight to do this live. It's refreshing considering we've had some time off. And I just want to kind of remind people that coming up on Sunday, I'll be live with Unfiltered Lucky and my wife Jen, as we're going to go over the 4chan and other various things from, we're revisiting some of the craziness of this case very early on. And that's something that Unfiltered Lucky has started the process on. So he's intrigued me to come over and jump into that, even though it's like he's got far more knowledge, and you probably do too, Kiki, of all that stuff, to where I'm just going to be winging it. But we're going to have that conversation, and throughout next week, I'm sure Kiki and I will stay busy and try to bring as much content and great lives and good discussions. And everybody just be a little bit patient with me, because I don't know. Monday I'm having that surgery, and we'll see how I feel after that. We'll see.
We're going to see you again before then, right? Because you have, and at the very least, you guys all be in the chat, modding for AR at the very most. If you need, I'm there for the long haul. It's going to be a really good show. So that's going to be, what time is that Sunday?
So it'd be 8:30 Eastern time. It's 5:30 West Coast time that will be happening. And I'm sure something you'll probably be seeing me do some work tomorrow. If it's not with Swamp, I'll get some content out. And I'm sure you have some work that you'll be doing tomorrow as well. So Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday 2:30 I'll be underneath the knife at the surgeon. So we'll see what happens with that, because I'm scheduled Thursday. I'm scheduled to jump in with Pete, Murder Metal Mayhem, and do a live. And those are always interesting. What a creative mind Pete has. Let me tell you, when you get him going, it's like writing a crazy book. But it's always enjoyable. It's fun to get into discussions with him, and he kindly invited us over to do that as well. So I'm looking forward to that too.
Me too. I can't wait for that. And yes, Pete, because we all know Pete is a writer, and we can hear it, and the way he delivers his story. His videos are great lately. He does a great job bringing you full circle, and he just has a way of talking about some of these more sensitive alternative theories. He does a great, same thing with Lucky and Jen as well. They have a great way of talking about these things without, they're just, they're a great way of speculating about these things without, with being very sensitive to the way that they're doing it. We'll say it like that. And so all three of them do a great job. So I cannot wait to see that content. Like I said, I'm going to be in the chat, you guys. So for my subscribers for my viewers who aren't subscribed to AR, please go over, check out his channel and hit that notification bell, because these are going to be awesome shows with two powerhouse creators in our little ultra specific Idaho 4 niche here on YouTube. So
I think what I enjoy most in working with the people I've been able to is literally the comfortable, just laid back nature. It's we don't talk about like really crazy, stressful things. We have good conversation, let it flow to where it goes. And Kiki, you and I have that as well, to where we can get into some very difficult conversation topics, and we can do it with just a kind of a relaxed feel to it, to where it doesn't get overwhelming. Because this case, I understand everybody that's in the chat. We have some amazing creators in the chat as well. And I definitely give you guys a lot of love and a lot of respect for all that you do. I think everybody understands this is a very difficult case to discuss. And even though I've had disagreements with creators out there, I definitely give them a lot of respect for the efforts that they're making. And it's just such a difficult conversation. Every time we visit this case, it's like reopening a wound, and the emotions can get high. And I'm glad that I have people like yourself, Kiki, and Lucky and Pete and my wife, that just keep it on a relaxed nature, so that we can get through it and we can keep our minds, because not only is it hard to talk about the subject, but it's very difficult to navigate through the hate that comes our way as creators. There's a lot of crazy things that people want to put out there or say that are unnecessary. And I just have a lot of love and respect for the community that keeps it real and respectful. And for that, I'm gonna shove it over to your plate, Swamp, for you to say your goodbyes. But I want to say thank you to everybody in the chat. Thank you for everybody that survived this live. You guys all have a great night, and we'll be seeing you again soon.
I don't have much more to say, except sincerely, the way that I just always like to make sure I'm taking the time to do at the end of a live stream. Before I do that, I just want to say, Jeremy Pearson, thank you for the gifted memberships in the super sticker earlier. I really appreciate my members. That our membership really helps us motivate us to keep going. But with that said, I want to again just thank you to the chat. Really kept us on point tonight, and really appreciate our mods. Thank you for keeping the chat clean and positive, and keeping the chat flowing. We know you guys put such thought into your comments. So I just want to start by saying that, and thanking my mods in the chat. Thank you to the viewers. I said it before. I'm just going to say it one more time in case you didn't hear it. We understand. You know, you could be anywhere tonight. So whether you're catching us on the replay or here live, we really appreciate you welcoming us into your, you know, into your homes, into your office. Whether you're leaving a comment or just watching, we just really appreciate you being here and listening to what we have to say. And just also thank you to all my researchers, particularly my friends on Discord, my server. Just really appreciate you giving us your real-time thoughts. You can see them reflected in the community we surround us with. As Giovanni was just saying, your vibe kind of attracts your tribe. Your voices are echoed in the things that we say because you take the time to give us your thoughts. So thank you again. Sorry, it's always a long goodbye with me, but I can't help it. I love you guys. So.
Well, in all of that, I gotta say, Kiki, why didn't you mention something about the craziness of my hair?
I love your hair.
I mean, it's like wild right now. This is literally, I don't even want to explain it, but it's just all over now. And not a single heads up from you that I've got like the devil's horns going on in the blonde. And all right, whatever. But anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in with us. We're going to see you again very soon. Y'all have a great, great night.